call the meeting of Environment and Natural Resources Finance and Policy Committee to order. A quorum is present. Representative Edelson, have you looked at the minutes for January 31st?
Yes, and I move those minutes, Mr. Chair.
Representative Edelson moves the minutes for January 31st, 2023. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails and the minutes are approved. First up, we have House File 372, Representative Hollins, products containing PFAS notice required and rulemaking required. We did take public testimony yesterday. Representative Hollins is in committee to achieve quorum, and here she is right now. So,
apologies.
We were just introducing you, so. Members will take questions, and Representative Gilman was the first on the list, but House File 372 received a full hearing with public testimony on Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. The committee will be limited to member questions and final actions. With that, I will move that House File 372 be recommended to be re-referred to the Commerce, Finance, and Policy Committee. Questions from members? And Representative Gilman, you're the first on the list.
I'm the first on the list? You put me on the list already, Rick?
From yesterday.
Thanks. Oh, from yesterday.
From yesterday.
My
And
gosh.
you,
Can I defer to the next person on the list and come back?
okay.
Chair?
Representative Heinzman?
If I am next on the list, Mr. Chair, that's fine. Otherwise, I would defer.
Oh, no, Representative Jordan is actually, she was on yesterday. So we have the post-its from yesterday. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always important to preserve your place in the queue. I had a question for the author. Representative Hollins, is there anything in your bill that directs someone to put PFAS in a product or not put PFAS in the product? Is there a ban in this bill in any way?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and thank you, Representative Jordan. No, there is no direction to add or not add PFAS. There is no ban.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then is there anything about labeling in your bill at all that if a product contained PFAS, would there be any sort of disclosure to anyone but the commissioner of the MPCA?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Jordan. No, it is simply disclosure to the Commissioner of the MPCA with that information.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Hollins, for that. I would personally like to see a label, but this doesn't really seem like there is it's clear that there's no ban, there's no labeling requirement. I think this is a pretty reasonable step for products that contain PFAS and the producers of those products to take. And it's very basic and maybe not as big a step as I would actually like our state to take. But I want to thank you for bringing this bill forward. I think there was some testimony that I didn't quite track yesterday that seemed to indicate that there was a ban or some kind of labeling requirement for this, and I don't see that in your bill at all. So thank you for clarifying that this is not a ban in any way.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Jordan. Yes, I think I would agree with you. And I also wanted to point out the fact that we are talking about when PFAS is intentionally added. So not PFAS that happens to exist, but when it is intentionally added to a product, we are asking that that is reported to the Commissioner of the MPCA. Thank you.
Representative Gilman.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. So I've got a couple things. So I just heard you say when it exists or when it's added to, it's disclosing it. When would PFAS exist? And because you just said when it exists, it wouldn't change, but if it's added to something, it would change. What does that mean?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Gilman. My understanding is that occasionally PFAS is on things. There's exposure to it. I believe that somebody was talking yesterday about the situation when you're, when you're gardening and if you are using water that has PFAS on it and it is therefore on the vegetables that are being sold. We're not expecting the vegetable growers to be disclosing that to the MPCA. It is just when it's being purposefully added. And recognizing that there is a lot of reasons why somebody might purposefully add PFAS to a product. We heard from some medical device individuals that said this is very important to their products, and I think that we can all recognize that that is true. But there's no reason why they can't disclose that to the commissioner or on a public website so that people can make informed decisions.
Representative Gilman.
Okay. And then the second thing I was wondering is, do you happen to know, like, just the magnitude, the size of what this bill would be asking for, just the scope that needs to be reported to the MPCA, like, of the hours that's going to be take the people that it'll take to make a database to create this space that they've done in other states? Has this happened in other states or not? The bill that you're proposing, has this happened other places?
Representative Hollins.
Yes, my understanding is that there have been bills that are similar to this.
Do you know what states they're in and where they're finding success with this?
Representative Gilman, if you look at the fiscal note, it will
Okay.
have the cost.
It does have the cost on it.
Yep.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Representative Hollins.
And to further respond to your question about the magnitude and the burden of doing this, we've also had some conversations about the potential that PFAS is already known to be in certain products, and that actually disclosing that information is not necessarily difficult to the commissioner. In particular, when we think of products that are created with OSHA in mind, where they have to list out all the different exposures that people have to those products when they're working in those facilities. So there is the potential of just copying and pasting that information from one location where you have recorded it for OSHA purposes to the commissioner of the MPCA. I don't have that. I would have to look further into the OSHA component of it, but we know that that does happen occasionally.
Representative Gilman.
All right. Yeah, I think that's it for now. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Representative Heisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Hollins, I'm looking at the number of folks that support the bill, kind of looking through the list of usual characters, and nothing against them. But then I'm looking at some of the opponents, and I was actually kind of surprised. Folks from the medical field that you just referenced a few moments ago, and I'm not completely clear on how their concerns might be addressed. I believe the bill is being laid over, but I do want to mention, it's going to Commerce. I do want to mention a few of those that surprised me. So like the Medical Ally, Animal Health Institute, a number of others that are working on healthcare products, the Consumer Healthcare Products Association. And then I also saw, and Representative Gilman was, I think, referring to a concern because we had been visiting about a similar bill that was in California that I believe was just vetoed by Governor Newsom. It sounds like there's more going on here than maybe just at the surface that we might be able to hear in committee today. And in yesterday's testimony, a number of testifiers were mentioning concerns. My question, I guess I'll start with is, do we have, and Representative Gilman actually referred to this somewhat as well, but I'd like to narrow it. Do we know the universe of products that will be having to report to MPCA? Like, are we talking about 100 different products? Are we talking about 1,000? Are we talking about hundreds of thousands? Do we have an idea of, like, maybe MPCA has this information, Representative Hollins, I don't know, but are we talking about what size is this group of products? Because this could be a huge impact to industry across the state of Minnesota. And I'm trying to get a better idea what that is.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Heisman. So the first thing I'll say is, in your response, I'm actually surprised that those folks are against it as well, because asking for disclosure from an industry is not asking that much, especially when that disclosure is, there's a giant loophole saying that as long as it's on a public website, that's okay. That's not asking a ton. I mean, if I can get the ingredients in my kids' Fruit Loops, I should be able to get the ingredients of the things that are going into my heart or going into my brain. I think that's a very reasonable request. To answer your more specific question, I don't believe that we know as of yet what the number of products would be.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't disagree with you, Representative Hollins. It sounds like an easy thing, but if this bill is, or a version of this bill is being vetoed in California, there's a number of, I think, questions that should be discussed, and that's why I'm bringing it up and trying to get a better idea. And I'm not sure that in your answer I'm hearing if that's actually being fully understood by the bill author or even those here testifying for the bill. I'm trying to get a better grasp on that. So if we could get more data going forward, and maybe in the next committee stop we could, to know exactly who this is affecting. Because I don't think these folks that are opposing the bill are folks that have nefarious intent. They're recognizing that there's maybe some challenges here that have yet to be fully vetted out. The other question I was hoping, and you mentioned it, Representative Hollins, I think, but just to get more specifics, you said there's going to be a public website that would be available to make this information, there for the public. Are we talking about a site hosted by MPCA, or is MPCA going to be taking on the responsibility of collecting this data? Like, what would that look like, and what would MPCA's role be?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Heinzman. I do appreciate the questions, and I do think you're right. Like, this is something that requires a lot of questions, and we need to understand what it is that we're dealing with. What I will say is, in your comments about asking companies to do this, I believe that it is well within the purview of this body to ask companies to do things that protect Minnesotans across the board. And so I don't think it's inappropriate for us, and I recognize that there may be burdens on companies to do this, but the reality is that's our job. It's our job to make sure that we are protecting folks. To answer your question, though, the website that I'm referring to is not a website that's maintained by the MPCA. It's just any product's website. So imagine 3M has something that includes PFAS, which we know they do. If it's on, 3M has a website, they have a product website. If it is disclosed on that product website, that is enough, and they don't need to disclose it to the commissioner.
Representative Heinzman.
Chair, thank you. Representative Hollins, there's a couple of questions I would have to further explore what could literally be hundreds of websites by the sound of it, but that might be confusing to the public. Maybe there's an issue there. And then, there's a lot of things that I think about issues, Representative Hollins, but do I have data to back it up? And quite honestly, I'm not really hearing that kind of background information to support some of the assumptions that I think you're making in this legislation. I would like to have more actual data to back that up as opposed to what I think about an issue as a legislator. So I'm not trying to be especially critical. I'm just saying, in order for this committee to be making a decision on this legislation, passing it on to the next committee, I would hope that we could get more background than what we're getting. And I don't mean to be especially critical. I just feel like responding with the suggestion that we think a certain way about an issue really isn't sufficient. And so I'm not going to be supporting it going to the next committee until those questions are answered.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and thank you, Representative Heinzman. I just want to clarify, if I'm sounding punchy, I don't mean to be. I understand that you're just asking questions and doing your due diligence, and I totally respect that. So let me just first put that out there. But I think what we can agree on, well, maybe, I presume we can agree on, is that PFAS is causing harm to people. And sometimes it is necessary to have those products available, but sometimes it is not. And I think that this is an issue of consumer protection and also consumer choice to make a decision about knowing when and where PFAS is in their products. I agree with you. I think looking at hundreds of websites is overly burdensome to consumers. And if it was totally up to me, I probably would not include that part. But this is something that we've negotiated with some of the stakeholders in this area because we understand that it might be unduly burdensome for them to be reporting it to the commissioner on a regular basis within 30 days. So I do think that this is a little bit of it's a little bit of a give and take. But I do understand your perspective and where you're coming from, and I appreciate the line of questioning.
Representative Heinzman, and I've got several other members. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think that we should definitely have a ongoing conversation here. I'm glad to hear that it sounds like we'll have that, but I'll just end at this point with just a very specific question. And it may have already been answered, but I just want to make sure it's fully addressed. Will MPCA post this data to its website?
Representative Hollins.
That is not my understanding, no.
Representative Edelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Heinzman, you're literally one of my favorite people now that we're on Ways and Means together. I want to preface this by saying it. So I was just looking up. I know, here we go. Continuation from yesterday. So you had mentioned that the governor had vetoed all of the PFAS. It was just the reporting. I just want to make it clear on that. It was just the reporting that he actually vetoed. It wasn't the ban. So just clarifying that. And I would just say this. I mean, this is my first time on environment, and this is my first time really learning about the harms of PFAS. And I stayed up last night all fired up after our committee hearing, and I went home and I was researching, and I've got a whole boatload of students. They're just researching. And I would say that what they want more than anything, Minnesotans, when they elect us to these spaces, is to make sure that we're protecting their families. And I think at very least, we can have disclosure of PFAS. Disclosure and honestly of education, because as we all sit in this room, I hope that we can really make sure that the communities know that the products that they might be using could harm them. And so I do think that I'm very supportive, but I just wanted to clarify on the ban.
Mr. Chair.
I was going to go to Representative Hollins just for a comment as the author.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and thank you, Representative Edelson. You're correct on the reporting aspect of it. And also, I should note that part of the reason, I think the entire reason that California's governor vetoed it was because their budget was tight and they had other priorities. And so Governor Newsom was very clear in his statement about it that there's a possibility that they take this up later. So it's not just because it's overly burdensome, it's because they do not have an $18 billion surplus like we do. So.
Representative Heinzman, it almost seems like you're asking that we follow California's lead. Representative Heinzman.
Mr. Chair, in this case, that may be correct. And, I appreciate Representative Edelson, our little back and forth. I will mention, this is something I've been tracking almost since I came to the legislature nearly a decade ago. And it started with how does MPCA handle leachate, and quite honestly, the issue became really frustrating to me because the answer was, as it is in many cases, dilution and discharge directly into the Mississippi if it has PFAS contamination. That's permitted facilities around the entire state. And then from there, it moved on to, I think, where we've been progressing today. And so my issue is not with companies being put in a position where they need to disclose this necessarily. Right? Is what does that look like? What does that impact? How can we do this as efficiently as possible? And if other states like California are vetoing similar legislation, I want to know exactly why. I don't want to guess. And I don't want to repeat whatever mistake was in their legislation. Okay? I think that's fair. And if there is something we can do to help those folks that are in a position that could wind up with significant fines and fees and significant costs to expedite that for the public's benefit, we should all be working towards that together.
So we have 3 bills on the calendar. I have 2 people that want to comment. I'm going to go with Representative Brand because he has not spoken yet, then Representative Gilman, and then we are going to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. I just want to bring up the point that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has a PFAS blueprint that was introduced 2021. 3 legs to the stool. 1 is prevention, 1 is management, and 1 is cleanup. I don't know how we get to cleanup. I don't know how we get to management without knowing what's in the products that everyday Minnesotans are using in their homes, their offices, in their cars, and everywhere else without getting this disclosure piece. And so I really think that this is how we go forward in Minnesota, and we have to look at ways to prevent. we have to look at ways to manage, and we have to look at ways to clean it up. There's 90-something landfills out of 100 and something landfills where this is leaching, they're closed, and it's leaching into the local groundwater. We just talked to Representative Listagard just mentioned yesterday something about a lined pit where we can dump this stuff in the range. Well, we need to know what that stuff is before we dump it into your pit, okay? It ain't a pit. Well, whatever it is. And so at the end of the day, I think it's really important that we address this. This is a way to address it.
Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. So just real quick here, even on Fox News last night, it was reported that there's working groups right now being formed for the 3M settlement here, the 3M settlement grants in the state of Minnesota. And as I talked to Chair Hansen last night, we talked about this, and you, Representative Hollins, you mentioned not all states have an $18 billion surplus. I just want to be careful when the due responsibility and the burden should go back to these companies that have created this situation, and where we feel some concern, and I feel some concern, my stakeholders being not only just my district, but all Minnesotans, is to go, how can we responsibly use taxpayer dollars to, provide opportunities for great things, but if it's not going back on the companies that have already been, that have caused the damage, I'm going somewhere with this. So I was curious if there's a possibility that we could just hold this over in a sense of create a committee, work with other committees that are already, partner with this 3M working group and figure out some solutions before we push it through that would be respectful for not only the taxpayer dollars, but, if the MPCA staff, I see the fiscal note, and we have full-time employees, but if they're not putting it out there, the disclosure, why would we put taxpayer dollars into that? That's what I'm having issues with. And I'm also, my daughter has worked as a welder. I'll just say this, she was in Decatur, Alabama. Huge settlement down there. Big issue happened with years of people not being good stewards of the land. And if we go and start putting, things on, we're not scientists here, or I'm not a scientist, but if we just put the cart before the horse in this, it makes me a little concerned. And I just would rather, I am passionate about this. My daughter had to get a baseline blood test before she's welding on the ground in a hazmat suit that has PFAS in it, okay? And we listen to our firefighters, but there are people in the room here too that have, Ivana over here has some information on just chemical, the chemical constituents and how things, when used separately, are not harmful. And if all of our blood was tested here, we'd all have some level of it in it. But it's like getting baselines, it's understanding the process, but also putting the responsibility back on people and companies that have created the damage. And to not just eradicate things and create policy that could have major, major impacts on so many things. And as we're moving forward with our energy plan, and you talk about landfills, as we're shutting things down and we're creating more opportunities for waste, I would be really hesitant to kind of move forward with that. So I'm wondering, can we create more of a separate committee or work together on this before this is just put through, so we understand the ramifications of that? That's kind of where I'm at. Chair Hansen, thanks.
Representative, if I can jump in. I think, we have the Norris bill that has been held over, and we had testimony yesterday about the turnout gear, and I was going to ask for volunteers to work on that, which I think gets into a bit of the health monitoring, biomonitoring, those type of things where there may be more of a public role, but it also might be another committee's role. So we have that, and I think I talked with Representative Norris about that prior to it because it's a piece that we knew was coming. I would like to move this bill out. It has maybe 2 or 3 more stops to go, but I would also ask for volunteers to work on this. I know that Representative Brand has a bill coming, But specifically on the turnout gear and working with the firefighters, I think there's a opportunity for bipartisan agreement there because it's a difficult question that we're going to have to look at. And, we had testimony from the Airports Commission as well, and I think they are interested in doing things. So, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Gilman. I appreciate that sentiment. I don't know if you know, but I live on the east side of St. Paul, so I'm very near to 3M, the lake that's closest to my house. Like, I will not let my children swim in because it is so contaminated. And frankly, by 3M and other corporate entities. And so I agree with you. We do need to hold them responsible for the things that they have done. But I do think that this is a yes and situation. The working groups that are working with 3M to figure out their settlement, they are not obligated to finish that in any particular time frame, and they are not required by the state to provide, information about what they're doing. And so I think that's great, and I'm all for corporate responsibility. I mean, I used to work in corporate responsibility, so I understand that very well. But I think what we're doing here is looking at the fact that 3M is not the only company that includes PFAS in their products. And the disclosure here is going to help the market and help people really be able to make their own decisions about when and where they want to be engaging in these very harmful forever chemicals. So I agree. I think that we definitely need to work on this on the, corporate responsibility side, but I also think that there is room for this bill to move forward. Also because disclosure is pretty much the least onerous aspect of what we can do regarding PFAS. All we're asking is that they tell us what is in it. And so I appreciate your sentiments, but I would ask that this continue moving forward.
I renew my motion that House File 372 be recommended to be re-referred to the Commerce, Finance, and Policy Committee. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Ayes have it, the motion prevails. Next up, House File 673, Representative Lee, air toxic emissions, reporting required and rulemaking to regulate air toxic emissions. I have provided about 15 extra minutes to that prior discussion, so Representative Lee, you have 3 bills here, and hopefully you can be judicious with your time.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to present House File 673. Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, I do want to note that this was a result of one of the reports that the legislative auditor had, done a special review on regarding water gremlins, and one of the findings was how there was a lack of air toxics reporting and monitoring. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask legislative auditor Judy Randall to join us. And I just want to make it clear, Mr. Chair, that I'm asking the auditor just to report the finding that was in the special review and not to, take an official position on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
As Ms. Randall is coming, Representative Lee, will you move that House File 673 be laid over for possible inclusion?
That is my motion, Mr. Chair.
And Representative Lee, I believe you have an A1 author's amendment to get the bill in this session you would like. Could you move your amendment and explain it briefly?
Mr. Chair, I move the A1 amendment. So the A1 amendment requires that within 5 years after adopting the rules required in the subdivision 2 of the bill, that the commissioner must amend existing air quality permits in the following categories as necessary to conform with the rules, the federal permits, individual state total facilities permits, CAT emission permits, and also the amendment clarifies that the agency's cost to adopt the rules under this section and to conduct regulatory activities, including any monitoring, inspection, and data collection and maintenance must be collected through the annual fee paid by the owners or operators of the permit.
Any discussion to the amendment? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. The A1 is adopted. To the bill as amended, Ms. Randall, welcome to the committee and state your name for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Judy Randall. I'm the legislative auditor. And in the interest of time, I will be very brief here today. As Representative Lee mentioned, the legislative auditor's office issued a special review about 2 years ago, in February of 21, on MPCA's regulation and oversight of water gremlin. So it was a focused review looking at the extent to which the PCA provided accurate and appropriate oversight and regulation of water gremlin. We had a number of findings in that report, and I'll just talk to the ones that I think relate most directly to House File 673. We did note that PCA did not issue an initial air quality permit in a timely way to Water Gremlin, that they did not place adequate controls on the use of TCE, and then notably that MPCA's absence, I'm just going to read from the report so that I get it exactly correct. MPCA's absence of air toxics rules and its air quality permit backlogs are longstanding issues that could have contributed to weaknesses in the agency's oversight of Water Gremlin. We also noted in this report that we had done another evaluation 30 years prior that also noted the lack of rules related to specific air toxics emissions. Because this report was focused really narrowly on the oversight of Water Gremlin, we didn't make a recommendation related to kind of broad rulemaking efforts by PCA, but we do note that right now PCA requires more aggregate reporting on emissions of volatile organic compounds, but not the breakdown of specific air toxics emissions, and that has been an area of concern for OLA for more than 30 years now. With that, Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just an overview of the bill. Section 1 of the bill deals with the air toxics emissions reporting, that any facility operating with an air quality permit must annually report its air toxics emissions to the MPCA, including those facilities with permits that are not required to keep records of their air toxics emissions. The commissioner must determine the method to directly measure or estimate air toxic emissions and must incorporate this annual reporting of air toxics into the air quality permit of each facility. Section 2 of the bill deals with the rulemaking for the air toxic emissions. Subdivision 3 is where we have the contents of the rule that the rulemaking must address the following: air toxics in facilities that are to be regulated, the performance test to measure what emissions are there, the air monitoring, including continuous monitoring systems, reporting emissions by facilities to the MPCA, and the frequencies of the inspections. So, Mr. Chair, in developing the rules, the PCA must establish testing, monitoring, and inspection requirements that reflect the health risk and environmental risk posed by certain air toxics in facilities, each facility's record of compliance, and exposure by individuals in the environmental justice area. And then, like I mentioned before, the cost of the MPCA for rulemaking should come from the annual fees paid by the facilities. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to a public testimony.
First up, we have Gregory Pratt, University of Minnesota School of Public Health. Dr. Pratt, welcome, and state your name for the record.
My name is Gregory Pratt. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I worked for 32 years at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, working on air quality issues. I retired from the agency in 2016. Since 1999, I've been a faculty member at in the Environmental Health Sciences Division in the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. My expertise is air pollution, and I've published over 50 scientific journal articles on the sources of air pollution levels, the movement of air pollution in the atmosphere, human exposure to air pollution, its effects on human health, and the socioeconomic aspects of air pollution. Most recently, I've been consulting for the National Institutes on Environmental Health Science to examine exposure and health effects from the cleanup following the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. The views I express here today are my own, and they do not necessarily reflect the positions of organizations with which I am now or have previously been affiliated. Representative Lee asked if I would give my opinion on the bills he and his colleagues are proposing that require reporting of toxic emissions and evaluation of community status in citing a facility. I strongly approve of these measures. Many years ago, MPCA was prepared to promulgate air toxics rules, and I think the previous speaker mentioned that. The rules would have included reporting of emissions, among other things. However, that in 1991, that effort was abandoned in favor of a voluntary approach. So in practice, many of the permittees do a very good job and report emissions accurately. Unfortunately, that result is not ubiquitous. For the many facilities that do not report or that do not report accurately, MPCA must estimate emissions based upon available, often incomplete information. And this lack of reliable information leads to inaccurate assessments of health impacts from air pollution and incomplete information on the parties responsible for that air pollution. The best estimates indicate that on the order of 100,000 people die each year from the effects of air pollution in the United States, and many more suffer illnesses. So it's not really a trivial matter. Minnesota's, going off that number, Minnesota's deaths would be on the order of 5,000 per year. So I have also studied the socioeconomic impacts of air pollution and found that in the past and continuing until now, roadways and polluting industries are located disproportionately in neighborhoods with a high proportion of people of color and low socioeconomic status. We know, and I have published studies showing this in Minnesota, such communities have higher air pollution levels and more adverse health effects as a result. In the past, the air was treated as a free good and polluters could put their waste into the air without cost or consequence. But things have changed. We all want the right to breathe clean, healthy air, and laws have been passed to limit air pollution. However, the problem persists. And recently, the concept has gained some traction, which one could call chemical trespass. And that asks the question, by what right did your air pollution get into my body? In order to answer this question, we need to know what chemicals and how much are being put into the air and by whom. And for these and other reasons, I support the proposal by Representative Lee and his colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before the committee.
Patrick Hanlon, City of Minneapolis. State your name for the record.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, representatives. My name is Patrick Hanlon. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Sustainability, Healthy Homes, and Environment at the City of Minneapolis. Thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to follow Gregory Pratt. He's done a lot of research around air pollution here in Minnesota over the years, and we all owe him a great deal of gratitude for the work that he's done. And thank you, Representative Lee, for having me come up and speak today. This bill, understanding what chemicals a facility might be emitting is helpful to the city of Minneapolis, to the people that live in Minneapolis and many cities around our state who have facilities in them. It's in our opinion, is more important than in understanding air toxics than it is in understanding the criteria pollution. For some of the reasons that Mr. Pratt laid out, is understanding the individual chemicals. This committee has done some great work around TCE and PCE and some of those individual chemicals that have a much more harmful effect. And so for us, it's about a right to know. Again, it seems like a theme here is disclosure of information, and so that we know what's being emitted into our neighborhoods wherever we live here in Minnesota. And we're very fortunate to have some great standards to look at as well. With the Minnesota Department of Health, they have health risk values that look at acute levels, levels that may be immediately dangerous to folks that are related to these chemicals, or on chronic exposure levels. And so we have standards that we can compare when we're doing air quality monitoring on a local level. on both of those ways that people might be negatively impacted. It's also helpful for us. We do have a culture of working with industry, with business, and the gentleman that's going to follow me up here today with the Chamber of Commerce hopefully can speak to that as well. It helps us so that when we're doing air quality monitoring, and we have quite an extensive network in Minneapolis, that we are looking at air pollution in Minneapolis, and that we're not searching for a needle in a haystack, that if we find certain levels of pollution that may be of concern to people's health, that we can figure out what specific facility that might be coming from and work with that facility. So we have partners with the Minnesota Technical Assistance Program through the University of Minnesota. There are other environmental initiatives. There are grant programs out there. We have our own grant funding that we work with businesses to help solve some of the issues and reduce the impact of air pollution on people that live in Minneapolis. So we are solutions focused, and we have examples of that where we work with industry. We've worked with the dry cleaning industry. We work with the automotive industry in coming up with positive solutions that we can reduce the impact, a win-win where we can reduce the impact on people's health that live in our neighborhoods. So, but that starts with disclosure of what we might be dealing with at a specific facility, so we can start to have that conversation and pull people together around solutions. So I want to again thank you for having me up here today. These rules help us focus our energy in the right area so that we can focus on solutions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Representative Lee. Thank you, Chair Hansen. And thank you, representatives.
Tony Quillis, Minnesota Chamber of Commerce.
Afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Tony Quillis. I'm the Director of Environmental Policy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you for the opportunity to make a couple of comments on House File 673. And Mr. Chairman, to put it into perspective, I pulled these numbers from the 2022 MPCA pollution report to the legislature that was published in April of last year. And this is just in general, not air toxics, but just in general. Air emissions from permitted sources are 20%. 42% of air emissions are from non-permitting sources. 20% are from off-highway vehicles, and 18% are from vehicles themselves. The four major criteria that are used for air pollutants for permitted sources between 2002 and 2022 have decreased by 50%. Mr. Chairman, they've decreased, but there are some inequities in the environmental justice areas, and we need to address those, and I'll get to them in a little bit. But those need to be addressed, Mr. Chairman, that are drawn out in that report. In terms of air toxics itself, those first statistics I mentioned were for air. For air toxics itself, 75% are from non-permitted sources, including fire, off-road vehicles. But 75% of air toxics are from non-permitted sources. Air toxics themselves, since 2008, have been trending downward, and that change every year has been showing it going down, Mr. Chair. And again, those are from the PCA pollution report to the legislature from April of 2022. In terms of the environmental justice areas that I just mentioned, there are a number of programs out there that I think are really good, and I think we should draw to. The Environmental Pollution Agency has their EJ screen that allows you to go in and put your address in or your neighborhood, and you can draw down to pollution, sources, socioeconomic indicators, health disparities, climate change data. It really has a lot of good data in it. The Pollution Control Agency has what's in my neighborhood. Again, you can go in, search a map, go through and find out all the facilities that would be in your area and what their emissions are, and no matter what the permit is. And we're talking about air today, but you could go through and look at solid waste, stormwater, feedlots, environmental review permits that are out there right now, Mr. Chairman. And I think those two, along with the Department of Health, and Mr. Hanlon referenced it a little bit, their min-risk program over there, I think does a spectacular job there. They update their sources all the time. They have a air toxics risk screening tool in there. And I think you can put your neighborhood in and put your information in there, and it provides cumulative background, list of facilities that require additional work. And then the PCA, credit where credit is due, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just going to hold up a screenshot of it. They have right now all the permits they have out and have been submitted to them on the map of Minnesota with the environmental justice areas drawn out and where they're at. And then you can go through and it'll tell you these the facility IDs, whether or not they're in an environmental justice area, the permit type, the contact, people that are in there, and whether or not the permit, where it is on the process. So, Mr. Chairman, I think, like I said, where credit is due. They've combined basically what's in my neighborhood with min-risk and put it into one area. Patrick Hanlon sold himself short. He and I hold up positions on, I'm co-chair of what's called Clean Air Minnesota out of Environmental Initiative. Him and I are both on the core team. And we've done a lot of work with statewide, but specifically in the metropolitan area with some state funding and some federal funding working on. Patrick had done a great job on working with dry cleaners, as he mentioned. Mr. Chairman, we talked about PERC for years. Patrick was instrumental in getting that out of dry cleaners in Minneapolis, and that program has been copied in other spots, and I think is a great program that he and I work on at Clean Air Minnesota. He's also working with auto body shops to work with them to move to more water-based repellents in there. So I think there are some good success stories here, Mr. Chairman, to draw to. Also, the city of Minneapolis has 100 sensors up right now and just was awarded $411,000 to put some more. Patrick and I were talking about sensors up in Minneapolis in environmentally sensitive areas, environmental justice areas to go through. And I think those are really good programs that we need to draw to. The governor himself has, in his budget proposal, $3.2 million and $3.2 million for a total of $6.4, Mr. Chairman, for capital equipment and process improvements in air pollution areas with environmental justice areas of concern. So I think, Mr. Chairman, in regards to that, also one final point, the IRA Act, I had listened to a great presentation from NCSL and Representative Cagle's committee about the federal money that's available, whether it be in transportation or healthcare. But in this space, Mr. Chairman, there was $3 billion available to states for environmental justice grants, and maybe the Pollution Control Agency can access, give us some clue on how that or how much is available here for Minnesota. But Mr. Chairman, in terms of what I just described, it is the data is there, and it shows that we need to work in environmental justice areas. I think the programming is in place, and I think the financial resources are there that we should be able to take care of this situation, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the bill itself and House File 673, as Representative Lee had mentioned, it's going to go from, the toxic reporting is going to go from 3 years to 1 year. It is also going to add some additional criteria to that reporting. Mr. Chairman, my concern is that some of that criteria that's going to be added there's no current testing methods for some of those additional criteria that are going to be added. Also, Representative Lee talked about the rules that must be addressed as we go through the rulemaking. Mr. Chairman, there's concern there that there's no permit threshold. So if we're talking about an air toxic such as volatile organic compound, with no threshold set there, there's a chance that the purchase of some simple cleaning products or some maintenance activities might draw a reporting requirement out of that, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to point that out. And one final point, Mr. Chairman, when we talk about required air monitoring, Representative Lee referenced the continuous emission monitoring systems, but also probably some clarification around whether or not ambient air quality monitoring would be involved. stack-based testing would be able to be involved, or a combination thereof, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for the opportunity to testify on House File 673, and I appreciate it.
Is there any other testimony from the audience? Is there anyone who wants to testify on this bill? Okay. Then we'll move to, on this bill, on 673? I think we have you for the next bill. Okay. Representative Brand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for the author. And so, Mr. Chair, Representative Lee, if something, let's just say that these reports come in late or they come in inaccurate, is there any teeth in this bill that would allow for fines?
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that is not specifically addressed in this proposal. I think that the bill being laid over, if that's consideration of the committee, that, we pursue that route, I'm open to taking a look at that. Thank you, Representative Brand.
Representative Brand.
I just wanted to remind the committee that in the news very recently, the Northern Metals was fined $12,000 by the MPCA for records show apparently that they were 35 days late with reporting and up to 66 days late on those same reports throughout the year when they were supposed to. And they also had emissions that were 60% above what their permit allowed them for. And so, when we talk about these point source information, that's not in live time. That would be nice, but also I think, we want to make sure everybody is acting in good faith. But when you're 2 months late on reporting and you're 60% over your emissions, that's, I think, where we need to have some sort of implementation process for fining. So that's all the feedback I have for that.
Representative Lee.
I don't really have any feedback on that. I think that that's a good point, Representative Brand. I really do appreciate you bringing up Northern Metals. And, in addition to Northern Metals, I think we just received, if you're on the MPCA's email list, a notice of intent to amend the water gremlin air quality permit that was sent out this morning too. And so I think that, we are continuing to see issues. And so, with regards to what we're trying to do here is to make sure that we have air toxics reporting so that communities know, what's going on in their areas and, their daily lives.
And Representative Lee, this bill is being laid over, and you are willing to work with folks as it.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Representative Heisman.
Thank you, Chair. MPCA has been referenced several times over the discussion. I'm wondering if maybe they could come down and let us know how they feel about
Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson. Representative Heisman.
Thank you, Chair. I was just hoping to hear from MPCA. You've been mentioned several times over the course of the discussion around the bill. Do you have any concerns, anything that you'd like to share with the committees, or anything that we should be considering as this bill moves through the next steps and as it's being heard again?
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the record, Tom Johnson, Government Relations Director for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. We've already had a conversation with the author. Really appreciate the conversation, Representative Lee. And as it currently stands, there are no major concerns for the MPCA for this bill. I think the agency has in the past, as Mr. Pratt referenced, looked at building in air toxics reporting into its systems, and so we would be willing to explore that again, given the direction from the legislature. I would also say that we just finalized a fiscal note on this. I think that would be our primary major insurance, is that we have the funds necessary upfront to then start the rulemaking process and go through that. And we've already had that conversation with the author. So we want to make sure that that we're being efficient in our permitting timelines, and so to build in extra bits into our permitting, we would want to make sure we're staffed up for that. Thank you.
Representative Heisman.
Mr. Chair, to that point, what are we looking at in terms of FTEs?
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Heinzman. Our fiscal note references, and I believe this was just completed, so I apologize if that hasn't hit the committee yet, but if it has, great. But we're looking at 4 FTE for the first, 8 for the biennium, but 4 FTE per year. No, that would just be 4 FTE to start the process. It would ramp up a little bit in 25, 26 to start doing risk assessments, and then full implementation of the program would be in 2027, where we see 10 FTE. And at that point, we would have a fee system in place and work with the legislature to make sure there's an appropriation back to the agency, because the fees would just enter the environmental fund and not come straight to the agency.
Representative Heinzman.
Last question, Mr. Chair. Just to confirm, was this legislation something that MPCA has been looking for and they saw a need for, or is this something that came from some other space?
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, this is not the governor's bill. It was brought forward by Representative Lee.
Representative Lee, how many years?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think on the issue of, air quality and air pollutants, been working here since, been in here in the legislature in 2017 regarding this specific one around air toxics. We had this discussion last year as a result of, some of the findings that we saw in Water Gremlin. Living in North Minneapolis, where we have some heavy industries on the riverfront, Representative Jordan and I, we share, the Mississippi River. This is a critical issue for all of us, and so that's why we took it upon us. I think that as legislators, for us to bring priorities over to make sure that our constituents are being heard, and so that's why it's here before the committee. And, really want to make sure that all voices are heard on this, for those that have testified, even to the administration and the agency, making sure that if there are any concerns that we work through those along the way.
I'm going to take that as closing comments. Representative Lee renews his motion that House File 673 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. The bill is laid over. Next up, House File 645, Representative Lee, disposition of money recovered from litigation or settlement of environmental permit violations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House File 645 before the committee with recommended referral to the Committee of Health and Finance and Policy.
Representative Lee, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Currently now, money recovered by the Pollution Control Agency and litigation or in settlement of a permit violation that could have resulted in litigation is state money and must be deposited in the general fund. My bill creates an exception when the pollution control recovers $250,000 or more in litigation or enforcement settlement from a permit violation and requires that 40% of the money recovered be distributed to the local community health board where the facility is located. The MPCA must notify the applicable community health board within 30 days of a final court order in the litigation or the effective date of the settlement agreement and collect the money and transfer it to the applicable community health board. The health board must meet with the local community impacted by the permit violation and incorporate their concerns into a project that addresses the residents' health concerns resulting from their exposure to pollution. The community health board may recover administrative costs related to the provisions of this paragraph. And this proposal direct the transfer and use of money only and does not create a right of intervention in the litigation or settlement of the enforcement action for any person or entity. And, Mr. Chair, just background information for the members that not have been here the last few years that I have brought the proposal forward. In 2017, the state of Minnesota entered into the settlement agreement with Hollins Metals Recycling in my district. And, one of my testifiers, one of my neighbors is here that will, can speak a little bit more about this, was when we found out that of the settlement, not many of that is coming back to the city of Minneapolis to address some of the health concerns of my residents. And I think that, for communities that's been impacted by pollution, that they should receive some kind of restitution from the harm that has been created. And so this is a proposal to make sure that, when there's a settlement or enforcement action above, the figure that I have in here, that the community that's been impacted have a say as to how the money is being used. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to my testifiers.
Roxanne O'Brien, North Minneapolis Environmental Justice. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Roxanne O'Brien. Thank you for having me, Fooly. One of the things I really appreciate about Fool is I've never known a public servant as supportive and actually listens to community as much as I have experience with you, Fool. So I appreciate that. It makes my job a little bit easier, although I've been running around crazy. I'm from North Minneapolis, and if you know my community, you know we've been through quite a lot over the past few years. Uprisings, police brutality, gun violence, health inequities everywhere, and inequities in every system that impacts us, housing, all that. It's a cumulative impact, right? Like the accumulation of problems happening in our communities. And so, as you can see, there's not many Black people here. Because it's really difficult to have access to people with power who make a lot of decisions that impact us. But here I am today. I just got off the phone with the governor's office and then came right in here to do some testifying. So again, I appreciate you taking the time to hear me out. I do want to say we do have, if you want to be more educated on what's going on in our community, TPT did like a little short documentary on us called Racism is in the Air That We Breathe. Although Black people aren't the only people impacted by this, there are poor white people just on the other side of the river, Northeast residents, a lot of who are, you know, my partners and folks who continue to help push environmental justice. But we have partners everywhere through every part of the government, and I'm hoping today to also recommit that relationship with you all, because we've been here for the past 4 years testifying for a lot of these bills. So real quick, just to get to the point, I was one of the members who have been heavily involved with the situation surrounding Northern Metals, as well as other pollution facilities in our communities, such as GAF, HERC, the list goes on. I think we have about 13 big facilities in our communities that are concentrated. And so a lot of our work, we have to go to every part of the government because everybody kind of seems to pass the bill on who's responsible for what around here. So currently we're working with the city on their zoning changes that are happening now, which is a big way that we can actually change the way our environmental justice communities are treated. So zoning was one of the main ways in which these, zoning is one of the major ways that we've been impacted by this. So there's numerous ways to do this work, but here, Fooly has brought to you 2 bills that could support our work as well, which is, one, if a community is being impacted the most, there shouldn't be money that's going back to an environmental bill that wouldn't impact the community that was harmed in the first place. So I'm here to speak to that. I think one of the main reasons why we got that was because of advocates like myself and other people who, at any point that we could access people with power, once again, at the MPCA, we let them know that it didn't make any sense. Although we're not treated like the experts, we are the experts. And it's interesting that places like Northern Metals, it took about 10 years of volunteer work to shut them down. And we don't really get too much credit for that. But again, I'm here telling you, we are the experts, and we're telling you places like Northern Metals, places like GAF, I'm quite sure there's corruption going on. These permits need to be reviewed. We have politicians who are keeping these facilities in our communities for economic reasons that don't reach the communities, that the people who actually live in the community. So we're asking you to just have a little bit more integrity with how these processes are done in our communities, and this is one way to do that. So if we're being harmed, you know, repair that harm. That's all we're asking for. Just as if your communities were harmed, we would hope the same for you all. And I think, are we still talking about the permit review, or is that the next one? Okay.
The next one.
So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Patrick Hanlon, City of Minneapolis. Welcome. State your name for the record.
Chair Hansen, representatives. You may know me from Bill HF 673. I was just up here. We'd just like to support, so this is HF 672 and HF 645 at the same time? Okay, just confirm.
Just 645.
Just for 645, okay,
Just
okay, thanks. So Roxanne is definitely an expert in her community and has definitely driven a lot of change. We've had some good conversations, hard conversations around what's going on in North Minneapolis and other North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis, our environmental justice neighborhoods in Minneapolis. In talking about the Northern Metals, that name has been brought up a few times, and there are, I mentioned, plenty of businesses that we work hand in hand with to solve solutions. That was not one where we were able to work together on solutions, and sometimes it comes down to the litigation at the end of the day. And we were out of that settlement agreement, we were able to get some really valuable money, and at the direction of our folks in the environmental justice community, Roxanne being a key member in those conversations, and still is, about how do we get that money out into the community. And so we've been able to test the blood of thousands of children. We've been able to get into homes and do lead remediation work, to do asthma remediation work at the direction of folks in our community. It's been really a great experience. Roxanne talked about a lot of the negative things that are going on in North Minneapolis, but this is an example of some really great work that can be done when we're all working together to resolve issues. And the term that we like to use is children are not lead detectors. And the way that the system currently works is that we end up finding lead in a house by finding it in a kid's blood first. And that's wrong, just to put it simply. And so this sort of funding that gets into local government, where we can go out and do preventative work and test blood, get into homes, and get at the hazards before children can get access to them, is incredibly important. And this is a tool that allows us to do that. And so it allows us to take money from a litigation case and put it back into solutions in the community. And so Minneapolis is in full support of HF 645. And thank you for taking my testimony today again. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wants to testify on 645? Seeing none, we have several testifiers. First is Representative Jordan, and then we've got Representative Finke, Representative Fisher, and then Representative Heinzman. And we do need to be done at 4:30. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Lee, for bringing this forward. I do represent Northeast Minneapolis. I have asthma. I deal with it every day. I have an inhaler in my bag. I think members of this committee have seen me use my inhaler before I present bills in this committee, like I do in every committee, to be able to catch my breath. There are days where I cannot leave my home because the air pollution is so bad that I can't walk more than 3 blocks. And this is Minneapolis. The blocks are not big. The blocks are not big in Northeast Minneapolis. And I'm not a rare resident of Northeast. Many of my neighbors also struggle with asthma. Asthma is the #1 reason prior to COVID why students in the Minneapolis Public School District missed school. This air pollution is something that is impacting people for the rest of their lives. It is making it so children cannot learn in school. It is giving lead poisoning, and if any of you are members of the Health Committee, we have a number of lead-related bills up tomorrow, so I'm excited to talk to you about blood lead level limits and lead service lines and everything else that we can do about this. But Representative Lee, I really want to thank you for putting this money into community, because we experience it. It's our lungs that are falling apart. It's our lungs that can't breathe the air that we're trying to walk to work or school through. So I'm very curious, and I know that Mr. Hanlon from the City of Minneapolis talked a little bit about this, but I am wondering if you can talk about some of what these grants directly would go towards, and how that would work to make sure that money is going back into community. For example, my inhaler costs $100 with insurance. I'm really happy to have that insurance, but that's an expensive thing. That's an expensive cost for me for one piece of medication that I need to be able to breathe. And so I'm wondering if you can talk to me a little bit more about what these grants would look like and how these grants would be putting money into community. And I see that we're using local government as a pass-through, but I'm wondering how this money is going to go directly to community. And before you do that, I do also really want to thank Ms. O'Brien. You've done a lot of work for a lot of years, and you've not gotten the roses that you deserve. And I'm hoping that things like this will make the work that you're doing will save lives in the future, and is making Minneapolis a better place, and is making the state of Minnesota a better place. So thank you for that work. So I don't know, Chair Lee, if you can talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Jordan, for those comments. So from seeing some of the funding, not directly from this proposal, because, it's not enacted yet, but back in 2019, the state of Minnesota, understanding that there were some issues with this, we were able to secure some funding through the 2019 Environment Finance Bill to give back to the city to really get out there. And so 4 of the programs, I would like to highlight that, the city of Minneapolis was able to implement. Number 1 was to identify and educate at-risk residents on asthma's triggers. Number 2, to enroll families with children suffering from poorly controlled asthma in a new asthma trigger mitigation program. They were able to implement community and block-by-block blood lead level screening events in cooperation with local clinics, which Mr. Hanlon touched on. And also, they were able to identify and connect affected individuals with resources to help reduce their environmental exposure to lead. And so I think that, this is just, after consultation with the residents that were impacted, this is the program. And it is my hope that, we don't have any situation like this in the future, but if we do, that the local community health board actually go into the community and actually solicit input on what can we do with some of these funding to address the concerns that we have with our health.
Representative Finke.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and thank you, Representative Lee, for this bill. I'm very excited about this bill. I'm excited it gives us a chance to do what Representative Gilman asked us to do earlier, which is hold corporations responsible and make them pay for their problems, which is one of my favorite things to do. But I have a factual question, which is how many settlements over $250,000 a year does the MPCA receive? And then do we know how much cumulative money that is at a year? And if we don't have that in the room, I'm happy to get it, but if we do, that would be great.
Representative Lee.
So in preparation for this, I think Mr. Johnson is here too, and so I will let them talk about that a little bit more specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Tom Johnson, Government Relations with the MPCA. Since 2017, we've had 113 settlements. So that would be a variety of different types of settlements, mostly stipulation agreements. Over $250,000, that would just be 6 in that time period. So this represents a fairly small number of the settlements that we find ourselves in. The overall average penalty amount, excluding the ones over $250,000, is about $25,000 per settlement. So these are out of the ordinary, but we have had some very public, larger settlements, of course, and in those cases, this would add up to a fairly significant amount for a community.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Lee, for bringing this forward. This is a great bill. Mr. Johnson, hold on a second. What was the settlement amount for water gremlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think most of the water gremlin issues were before my time, so I might phone a friend on this one. So I'll be maybe Assistant Commissioner Frank Kolash, which is also.
Mr. Kolash, did you hear the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Frank Kolash. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Assistant Commissioner for Air and Climate Policy with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. We're gathering the full bit of information there. I was involved with the water gremlin very early on, but then took a different position within the agency while the settlement was being completed. But my understanding. was that okay, that the primary basis for the enforcement tool was excessive emissions of trichloroethylene from the facility and improper reporting of their emissions data to the Pollution Control Agency. I think we also ended up identifying some hazardous waste violations and hazardous waste holding violations from the Pollution Control Agencies. That was the area of regulatory concern that we had, and were also issues with that I think the Department of Health and the local public health agencies had around the tracking of lead from workers back to their homes. But that's a different regulatory agency. So from the environmental side, the Pollution Control Agency side, it was excessive emissions of TCE and failure to report the non-working of their equipment, and then inaccurate emission reports, and then hazardous waste violations.
Representative Fisher.
I'm sorry, my question was, what was the settlement amount? How many dollars?
The amount.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Fisher. Doing the quick math, it is $4.5 million.
Thank you. And the reason I bring that up is at the time it was the largest settlement that had happened in the state of Minnesota. What was considered to help the community was the planting of trees that could be planted 40 miles away from the city of White Bear Lake where this occurred. No input from the community at all. The community was harmed in the process, and so I'm very thankful for Representative Lee for bringing this forward, because it's important to have their input into this. I mean, to plant trees in other communities after the harm was done in the local. And as was referenced here, this was a company that was an extremely bad actor. 25% of the kids that were tested that worked there had lead poisoning in their system. Every single employee's car had so much contamination that they had to be cleaned multiple times because of the lead in there. We're talking about people who or companies who are typically bad actors falling into here, and they've greatly harmed the community. And this is why we need bills like this to help the people who lived around Northern Meadows, to help the people who lived around Water Gremlin, to be able to get something that addresses their needs. Furthermore, we have to start looking more broadly is how do we track the people who live there and follow the long-term effects, because the methods we have now only take a look at people who live within a zip code at certain periods of time, does not account for people who lived there and moved, had problems, but because of where they live at the time, the problems are not counted. And this is a tough issue to figure out. I know that this is something Representative Clark looked at, but this is something we have to come back to probably in the Health Committee to figure out how do we monitor so we can actually track and then address these issues long term. Thank you.
And the motion is to send it to the Health Committee. Representative Heinzman. And then we are going to vote.
Thank you, Chair. I would have a question starting on line 2.35 and then extending into line 3.1. Representative Lee, all in all, I think there's some good stuff here. I do have questions because on line 3.1 specifically referenced is reasonable costs it incurs to administer the paragraph from the funds transferred to the board under this paragraph. In lots of other subject areas, Mr. Chair, we have limits to the dollars that can be used in administrative costs. I can think of many other in the LCCMR and other categories. Is there a reason that we're not putting in some guardrails here, Representative Lee?
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when this proposal was moving forward last year, this was some of the language that was proposed from the community health boards. And so as we move to the Health Committee, we could revisit this so that we ensure that, you know, if members of the legislature, the state, if this was to move forward, if we want some guardrails, we could amend that on in the next committee.
Thank you, Chair. Additionally, Representative Lee, if we could have a better idea what specifically these groups would be spending these dollars on, that would also be helpful.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I think that's why we allow for the language for the community health boards to reach out to the communities to really look at some of the projects that could benefit them because of the results of this. And if we want to further define that, I'm open to having the conversation so that we could, you know, scope it down to provide a framework of scope of work, and then also allow the flexibility for the residents to provide input to.
I take that as a closing comment, Representative Lee. Representative Lee renews his motion that House File 645 be recommended to be re-referred to the Health, Finance, and Policy Committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Ayes have it, the motion prevails. Last up, House File 672, public meeting requirements. Representative Lee. Will
Thank
move
you.
that House File 672 be laid over for possible inclusion?
That's my motion, Mr. Chair.
Representative Lee moves that House File 672 be laid over for possible inclusion. Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is one of the bills that, it's a recurring one from the last few years too. And similar to the bills that I have introduced in the past here, the previous two bills, to address some of the concerns that we are hearing from our neighbors. And as Ms. Roxanne O'Brien have mentioned with one of the facilities before, a lot of our neighbors have concerns with some of the pollutants that are coming out of the facilities. And so when we reach out to the pollution control agencies to take a look at, what's going on, working with nonpartisans found out that, in the state of Minnesota, we have non-expiring permits. And so what this bill will do will be to require the MPCA to hold separate public informational meetings every 5 years on facilities with non-expiring state individual air quality permit to allow the public to make comments or inquiries regarding any aspect of the permit, including but not limited to the permit conditions, testing results, the facility's operation, and the permit compliance. And then also requires the cost of these activities to be paid with air quality permit fees. And if there's a request for a review and the commissioner determines that a request to review the permit is not warranted, the commissioner must provide in writing the reasons for denying a permit review. This gets to some of the issues that my constituents have. And so, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it at that and leave it to the public testifier.
Roxanne O'Brien, North Minneapolis Environmental Justice. Welcome. Again.
Try to make this less long-winded, and then I'm gonna run out of here. But I guess I really think you guys should know our experiences and our stories, right? Like people come up here with data and facts all the time, but my experience working with Northeast residents, they were first the ones who kind of showed me what was going on at GAF. I wasn't really aware of a lot of things, but I had some folks who were always helping me just from the work. And some people brought up to my attention the cancer cluster in that area, in which I rarely hear our cities or our state talk about this. And then there's the fact of communities do try to fix these solutions on our own before we even come to these, state testifying situations. What we have found is we get ignored. There's been meetings that have been had without us. There's a particular development happening, Upper Harbor Terminal development, and I found out that like the developers got a chance to get into the room and talk with GAF. I've asked, to the developers, what was the conversation about? Nothing. I asked to be invited, nothing. Same thing with like Northern Metals. When they left, there's a whole new company that came in, even though community wanted that spot. A new trucking holding company is coming, and we were hoping to build like a park and work with the park board to do stuff. That's not happening. So this is an opportunity for you guys to make a way for us to actually get the information that we can't get, which if you open up their permit reviews, we might be able to answer some of the questions we've been having around why people can't breathe, why their eyes are burning, why people aren't able to have kids anymore, why people are getting cancer, and why people are still struggling with asthma. One of the things I think you guys should know is a fun fact. GAF, who we can't get, a pollution or a permit review for, because supposedly they haven't changed anything, so you can't open up a review. They've been saying that they're going to put some sort of oxidizer on it to cover up some of the smells. But we asked for a permit review about that, and we were told that apparently we can't get one. So it's a lot of like push back and forth over this information. And they bought the land for $1. They're grandfathered in. They make 25% of their $1 billion nationwide profits off of North Minneapolis alone. We're talking about some powerful people that are based, they're not a local company, they're based out in Europe. And you're giving people all this power. And when do you allow communities to actually benefit in the communities that they live in? We don't get that. So the least that legislators and people who have power can do is to at least get us the information that we need so that we're not out here struggling for years and years like we have been I know for me for the past 10 years. This is hard work. So yeah, that was pretty much it. I got to go too. Thank you.
Mr. Quillis, Minnesota Chamber of Commerce.
Mr. Chairman, Tony Colas from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, Director of Environmental Policy there, and I will be brief also because I know you all have to go. Mr. Chairman, just a couple of things on House File 672. When we're talking about the bill, we're talking about non-expiring state individual air quality permits. And to get to that point, you have to go through, and it is laid out in Minnesota rules, about public participation to even go through and get the permit in the first place. The state agency must public notice and comment it, and it goes through and details what must be in that. It also talks about at any point, an individual, such as Representative Lee or Ms. Battle, can go through and request a public informational meeting during that 30-day public comment period. So there's a process in place there to just obtain the permit and have a public meeting. Once that permit is obtained, Mr. Chairman, in Minnesota Rules 7007.1600, there is the authority for the commissioner there to go through and under two circumstances, it's called mandatory reopening or non-mandatory reopening, to reopen a permit. And I'll give you one example from the mandatory reopening is the commissioner of the agency determines the permit must be revised or revoked due to the assurance compliance with applicable requirements. But then there's also one under the non-mandatory opening that says the commissioner finds that the permitted facility or activity endangers human health or the environment. That gives the authority of the commissioner right there to go through and reopen a permit if they so need to, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to point those out, and I think the commissioner can have a public meeting at any time. Unless somebody tells me different, the commissioner can have a public meeting at any time. To the bill itself, Mr. Chairman, the fiscal note points out it's going to be affecting 118 permits throughout the state. We're not just talking about the city of Minneapolis, but throughout the state. City utility plants would be required to have these public meetings. University of Minnesota, Star Tribune, the United States Postal Service would be included in this, Mr. Chairman. So just wanted to point out some of those folks that would be included in this bill, and there tend to be some of them in rural Minnesota, non-controversial, and have no violations at all of their permit. In the bill itself, again, Mr. Chairman, on line 1.12, it talks about having public information meetings at regular intervals, and then it talks about having them every 5 years. So just trying to clarify there, Mr. Chairman, on those two, what I see inconsistencies, and then just trying to work with Representative Lee, because another one is at the public meeting every 5 years for this permit, they're going to review permit conditions, testing results, facility operations, and permit compliance. Under facility operations, sometimes that's not included in the permit. That's regulated by city or county ordinance or by a county use plan. So, conditional use permit. So trying to figure out, would the city or county employees also have to be at this public meeting, Mr. Chairman? So the concerns are that this would go through too much, and see if we could go down and scope this into a geographic area or a type of emission that we're looking at, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your time.
The bill is being laid over. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to testify to this bill? Anyone in the audience? Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Lee, is there any reason, given the number of businesses affected statewide or air permits specifically is what we're referring to, not just businesses, I'm sorry, that we couldn't trigger these public meetings with, say, a very low threshold in terms of like a petition, 50 people sign a petition. Maybe that would help to focus the attention of this legislation where it's most needed.
Representative Lee.
Thank you for the question, Representative Heitzman. And I think that's something that, I could consider. And briefly yesterday had a conversation with Mr. Quillis too. I think that, even beyond triggering of a permit and whatnot, how do we scope it in? Because I think that some of the discussion today is around environmental justice areas. So do we just scope it to those areas so that, we're not, gathering this, 118 or whatnot. And so I'm open to those discussion, and I really appreciate the comments that was brought before us. I hope that, before committee hearings like this, that we have that engagement so that, we could actually tailor the bill to a point where, maybe all members of the committee can agree to. And so, Mr. Chair, do know that it is my commitment to work with folks who have interest in this to make sure that we scope it down to just those that, are impacted, vulnerable communities.
I see that as your closing comments. Representative Lee renews his motion that House File 672 be laid over for possible inclusion in omnibus bill. The bill is laid over. Members, next Tuesday, we are having a joint hearing with the Senate on chronic wasting disease. We will be hearing from the University of Minnesota and various agencies, and also taking testimony. And then we have not scheduled Wednesday yet as to what we're hearing. We are still waiting for a number of bills to come forward, so we will be scheduling bills as we get them. With that, we are adjourned.